All right, y'all. It's Purdue's turn on summer school. I'm Bud Elliot. That's Mick Walker. That means we are talking Purdue. Boiler Sports Report is the place to go. Mick, what's going on, man?
I'm doing good, Bud. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Just ripping through these and learning a whole lot about college football. It's work, but it doesn't feel like work until you do like 8 of them in a day, and then your face kind of feels tired from staring at the camera for so long. Lots been changing around Purdue, though. Jeff Brohm, leaves to take the Louisville job. I don't think anybody can really blame him for taking Louisville and going home. And Purdue stays in division and bringing in Ryan Walters, who was Illinois' defensive coordinator. Prior had done a nice job at Missouri, also a reputation as a good recruiter, and he's got some big shoes to fill here. I mean, Purdue went 8-6 last year. Connolly, my friend Bill Connolly had him like in the mid-50s power ratings wise. That's a pretty good mark for Purdue's program. What are your initial impressions of him?
I think the initial impression of Ryan Walters is, like you said, he's very energetic. He's a younger guy. He comes from a background of defense, so I think you can feel that kind of that aggressive, that in your face kind of style just out of his personality. Just interacting with him, whether it's the press conference, I think he's very assertive and he's very well spoken when it comes to all that. It's going to be interesting to see how he replaces. You mentioned Jeff Brohm, and he achieved some great things at Purdue, brought the program back to really a place of relevancy, and he was able to coach plays up, coach football up very well, considering, I mean, Aiden O'Connell, former walk-on, Charlie Jones, who was their star wide receiver last year, former walk-on, and then Devin Mockabee, who was their star running back last year, was a walk-on throughout all that, and then Ryan Walters put him on scholarship. So it's going to be up to Ryan Walters and this coaching staff to really scheme it up the way Jeff Brohm did to hit those high points.
Let's talk offense here. Last year, top 50 level offense. I know they had some injuries. O'Connell missed the FAU game, and I think maybe just one game, maybe two. But a pretty decent offense for Purdue that was competitive in a lot of games. Quarterback Aiden O'Connell's gone, and also, I mean, Brohm, obviously we'll have a new offense coming in, which is pretty air raid from what I've been reading from you guys. How does Hudson Card look in this new offense? What are the big changes you can expect from this offense?
Gotcha. Yeah. So, like you mentioned, that Graham Harrell's bringing his version of the air raid. As I imagine you've learning about different styles of air raid. Everybody kind of claims that they have their own style of it, whether it's the spins you put on it. Graham seems to believe that his is somewhat more run based, that involves the tight ends. I think they try and involve some of that more power stuff. But when it comes to Hudson Card, he was really the talk of spring. You talk, whether it's Walters, Graham Harrell, Kevin Kane, the defensive coordinator, or even defensive players that went against them. Everybody said that he was probably the best player there, and he looked the part entirely. As soon as Ryan Walters stepped on campus and spoke about him when he could, he said that they thought they got the best quarterback in the transfer portal. And by all accounts, he lived up to that in spring. It's just going to be about, I think we both saw him play last year, and it's about in the year prior, it's about making sure that those practice results prove themselves on the field like they have not been able to do necessarily to the same level at Texas.
You think he is is he a better player than O'Connell? Like I'm trying to kind of like in my head rank these guys, and like O'Connell had a pretty nice season. I know Card does have some upside. How would you stack those two?
I think honestly, O'Connell was obviously got drafted. He's a very good quarterback, but I think part of that is the time in Brohm's system, being under Brohm. I think a lot of people believe that contributed to him having the success he did. I think they believe that Hudson Card brings a much larger running element to the offense just because he is so much better of an athlete, seeing as he was a former high school wide receiver there at Lake Travis. But I think if in this system with Graham Harrell and the simplicity it brings with the air raid schemes, the ability to be a dual threat player for them, I think they believe Hudson Card can at least be as good as a player as Aiden O'Connell has been these past few years for Purdue, which is high praise considering all that Aiden O'Connell accomplished for the Boilermakers.
For sure. They do have some pretty big losses to replace it. Receiver Charlie Jones comes over from Iowa. Good move, by the way, to go to some place that actually is willing to throw the football. And man, did they ever throw it to him? 157 targets. I think is probably like the highest or the second highest number that I've seen. X Hutchinson at Iowa State was also really, really high. We did that episode the other day. And Payne Durham's also gone. Did Corey Gramage, did he bounce the transfer that they had taken a couple weeks ago?
I believe UCF was able to bring him down to Orlando.
So they did get Jamal Adrien from FAU,
who they like a lot. They really like Jamal.
So Jamal seems like a hit, which would make sense given what he did at FAU. who around him, because if you're running the air raid, I mean, you may not be running 4 wide, but you're running 3 wide quite often. Who around him are guys that you would expect to step up for this unit?
Yeah, I believe if you go back and look at KJ Sheffield, who would probably be their leading returning wide receiver, I think they have a lot of faith that he could be somebody that, whether it's be the number one or have games where he plays like a number one or is featured like that. I don't know if he is consistently the number one, whether because you can go to a guy like Jamal Adrian or even Deion Burks is the other guy. I think they have a lot of faith in from the slot. I think him and Sheffield both play a lot in the slot. Either one of them could probably move outside as well. Deion Burks, I think he's somewhat of a younger guy. He's coming in, I think, his third year in the program. He took form a little bit last year, got injured in the bowl game against LSU with a scary head injury type of thing. But he's been back this spring. And Graham Harrell talked about explosive plays and wanted to make sure that they have those in the offense, and specifically mentioned Deion Burks as the guy that could help bring them. So TJ Sheffield and Deion Burks are the other 2 wide receivers that you'd probably want to know, other than Jamal Adrian, who we talked about, and they like Garrett Miller at tight end as well.
Okay. I feel like so far, just personally, I'm kind of buying into what Purdue's doing on offense. O-line scares me though. I mean, you lose Eric Miller to the transfer portal. He played 920 snaps last year and was not an amazing player, but certainly if you play 920 snaps, that tells me they don't have anybody better or anybody even nipping at your heels to try out there. You lose both guards. Is this a potential trouble spot for them, or do they feel good?
No, I think if there's one thing that caps the ceiling on this offense, it has to be the offensive line. Because, like you said, Eric Miller's gone. Spencer Holsledge is gone to UCLA, which was a quick one that obviously he's going to be an impactful player for them. Eric Miller was a starting tackle for him. And then they're probably their best offensive lineman is Gus Hartwig, a former All-American prospect, I believe in the 2019 or 2020 class. That was like a high 4-star prospect. He got injured late in the season with a lower body injury, so he'll also be out early in the season. So they'll have to have a backup center. Marcus Embo, I think he was a starting guard at some points last year. I think they tried some experiments on moving him out to tackle this spring. So I think Josh Kaltenberger, the backup center, will be obviously I think he slides in the starting center spot. Marcus Embo will play somewhere. And I think they like Jalen Grant, who's an offensive line transfer they brought from Bowling Green. I think those 3 would probably move somewhere around. I think we'll at least see Marcus Embo to start at a tackle spot, if I had to imagine, just because the athlete he is. And you'll see like Jalen Grant at one of those tackle spots. But other than that, you're going to have to play some younger guys, whether it's Muhammad Musa or some of these other guys, or Daniel Johnson, who's a former Canton State transfer at one of the tackle spots. Or they could both those 2 names, Musa and Johnson, could be their starting tackles. And then you're looking at a guy like Ben Farrell, who came from Indiana Wesleyan, who's the potential guard for him, or even I can't think of Luke Griffin, who came from Missouri with offensive line coach Marcus Johnson. That's another guy that could slide into a guard spot who played for Missouri at some spots last year. So it's going to be mix and match and just trying to find different spots.
One thing we've noticed when coaches jump jobs is the success rate on guys who they take with them is generally fairly high. Not necessarily implying that they will be a star, but because they've been able to work with the player in person as opposed to like a kid out of high school, like they generally know, okay, this guy can help me. Like this guy can play at this level. So that is comforting to know that the Missouri kid they took came along with the offensive line coach. Let's shift to the defense here. The last 2 years, Purdue has played somewhere between like passable to even good defense, which is notable because for most of my adult life, they've played, kind of poor defense for quite a while. They lose some important pieces, and yet like some of the pieces come back I kind of like. So if you can help me kind of shift through this, D-line scares the heck out of me. I mean, Sullivan, Dean, and Johnson are all gone, and those guys were fairly productive dudes. They took 3 transfers. Like, do the transfers need to hit, or is it more like they got guys behind them that could come back and make a difference? I saw the Lewis kid is still on the roster, and he played in 21, but I don't have much stats for him from last year. How do you see this shaking out?
Yeah, so obviously we mentioned O-line, and we mentioned earlier that Brohm could coach up. Brohm was a very good coach. The recruiting during this time at Purdue was not always where it needed to be, and I think you see that along the offensive line, especially defensive line. Mark Hagan was the defensive line coach for a long time. He went to Louisville with Jeff Brohm. He could recruit defensive line fairly well. So I think between those 3 transfers, you're talking about Jeffrey Mbaugh from Auburn, Isaiah Nicholas from Arkansas, and then what's the third one? There's a third one. I can't.
Malik Langham, the Vanderbilt kid.
Yeah, from Florida Vanderbilt. Yeah, there we go.
Yep.
That's the third guy. I think they believe all 3 of those guys can play and play well, especially Jeffrey Embaugh. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen him in person. This guy
he's huge.
He looks like an offensive tackle is what he actually looks like. And then
was he in for
they brought
spring?
in He was not. He was a late spring addition there, I think. But Cole Brevard's another guy because you also have to think with defensive line, they're switching from a 4-man front to, I guess it's technically a 3-man with 2 outside linebackers. It's going to have 5 players on the line of scrimmage. So they have to have, now they're bringing in a nose tackle, and that's going to be Cole Brevard from Penn State. So it's going to be transfer heavy, but I think they love a lot of their outside linebackers. So I think they have enough faith in the inside linebackers and the inside interior defensive linemen, and they love a guy like Nick Carraway on the outside. I think if there's a guy that's a leader of the team that could be the second best player on the team besides like a Hudson Card, it's Nick Carraway at outside linebacker, who they've sung the praises for all spring.
Interesting. So Carraway only played 250 snaps last year. Like if he's a major part, to pair him with what I assume Keaton Jenkins on the other side there, like that could be a really interesting combo because Carraway and Jenkins have, they're really more that like stand-up jack type, body type, and there's not that many teams in the West that chuck the ball around. So they may be able to play a more of a heavy front in more games than we realize. Like if you think about it, as you mentioned, the schedule, Fresno, we'll see if they can throw it without Jake Haener. Vatek, I don't anticipate being able to throw the football effectively. Syracuse probably can. Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa don't have passing games that totally scare you. Nebraska, Minnesota, Indiana, Northwestern. Like Ohio State, you'll probably have to get out of that 5-man front. But you could play whatever front you want to, and that's still a difficult game for most teams out there, unless your name is Georgia or Michigan, I guess. Secondary-wise, I like the pair of corners they have coming back, and I assume they do too, given that they basically never left the field last year. But you're losing your top 5 corners? Trice, Taylor, Graham, Jefferson, and Hampton?
Yeah.
Are they in trouble there, or do they feel like they've hit on these transfers?
Yeah, I think they really believe that they like the transfers. Marquise Wilson from Penn State, Markevius Brown from Ole Miss, and Salem Muhammad from Stanford. There's a lot of guys that they brought in that I think they have faith that at least one of them can stick next to Jamari Brown, if not have 2 transfer cornerbacks be impactful. I think the big thing is obviously Ryan Walters and Kevin Kane, the defensive coordinator who worked with Ryan Walters at Illinois with this defense. They believe that they're going to go with that 5-1-5 even at times, 5-2-4, something along those lines. They're going to play 4 to 5 defensive backs, and at times only 1 linebacker on the field. And I think they believe with those 2 returning safeties they have in Sanusi Kane and Cam Allen, and then when you bring in an experienced mobile linebacker like OC Brothers, I think they believe that they can maybe compensate with the corner play a little bit, or at least find 2 that are passable to play in that whole defensive backfield that's going to be multiple.
Mick, if last year's team lined up to play this year's team, and ignore the cloning part because obviously, we'd have to have some guys play for both teams. Is there a clear winner in your mind, or is it just kind of somewhat even?
I don't want. It's hard to say a clear win. I think you'd have to think that this year's team would be able to give them a game. But I mean, that's a team that won the Big Ten West. Obviously, they had a lot of luck in doing so, but they achieved things that had never been done before at Purdue with very experienced players and multiple NFL draft picks. So I think you'd have to lean that last year's team would be able to beat this year's team, just with the unknown of Hudson Card, the uneven history of Graham Harrell's offense, even though I think a lot of people are high on what he can do, and the unknown of how this defense is going to translate from Illinois to Purdue with the personnel.
If they drastically exceed expectations, which I don't know what their win total is in Vegas. I should probably have that pulled up.
I believe it's around 5 or so. It's right around that bowl eligibility mark.
If this team does find a way to go like 7-5, like beat their win total by 1.5, 2 wins, who's the guy other than Hudson Card, since we already talked about him a lot, who has stepped up a ton?
Yeah, I think obviously at that point, Nick Carraway's got to be a guy that's playing himself into one of the better defensive players in the Big Ten. But I think it's going to have to be, whether it's Jamal Dreen or KJ Sheffield, I think you have to have one of those guys that's creeping up on a second, third team, at least all Big Ten, like honoree, along with a guy like Hudson Card that can make this offensive passing game explosive and multiple and give them the ability to do so. But like you said, it's going to go down to Hudson Card and being able to steal some of these games against whether it's I know they really, obviously with the staff's coaching ties, and I don't know if you've ever seen it, but whenever they've had a few recruiting battles. So Brett Bielema and Ryan Walters, they've gone back and forth subtweeting wise at each other. So I think that Illinois game being a homecoming game in September at Purdue is going to be a big one they want to get. obviously you want to get your Indiana, and then obviously get the Fresno State game is big with Ryan Walters' first game. So I think if they're going to go through that and pull off some of these games, whether it's the Iowas, the Wisconsins, the Minnesota, some of those teams where the Big Ten West could be a toss-up, it's going to have to be Hudson Card teaming up with other wide receivers like Sheffield, Adrien, and then Nick Carraway just being a guy that's almost unblockable or pretty unstoppable on the defensive line.
And I assume the answer here is offensive line, but I'll ask since I ask it in basically every show. Excluding quarterback, what position group or position can they really not afford injury at? Because the backups just not that they suck or that they'll never be good, but that just they're not ready to help you this year as replacements. Like where do they really have to stay healthy?
Yeah, I think we the two biggest ones, the obvious ones would be corner and offensive line because there's so many transfer bodies being brought in. But I think the other one that we haven't really touched on is inside linebacker. They're not going to play a lot of them this year, but they have OC Brothers who's played a lot. Jacob Wallenberg left and transferred this spring. They have Yanni Karloftis, George Karloftis' younger brother, who's just kind of getting settled in this inside linebacker spot after moving from inside to D-line to inside to D-line throughout the early years of him being on campus. So I think if you exclude offensive line and quarterback and then even cornerback, I think inside linebacker is another spot where if OC Brothers went down, it would be some guys that aren't necessarily the athletes they need to be on the field when it's only one linebacker on the field.
Makes sense. Mick, really appreciate the time. Everybody needs to go down. I guess you're going to have to point to it because I'm on the left side, but there's a QR code that will be put in post-production. Appreciate the time. Everybody needs to check out Boilers First Report.
Appreciate it, bud. Thank you.